I think this is critically important. You know, the stakes are very high around IT these days, and what's so important is to be really confident about the currency and capability of the people that are implementing these mission-critical systems. So for people who are not expert in IT, accreditation gives that confidence and reassurance. So I think it's a fantastic vehicle for raising standards and ensuring consistency across the industry. Well, the critical part about that is actually making sure that the education sectors and the business sectors actually form really meaningful and enduring relationships, because at the moment they tend to talk the talk of working together, but it doesn't always translate in practice. But again, you know, the industry is moving so fast, it is impossible really for any one of the institutions to be able to meet those needs without adopting a much more collaborative approach. By doing so, I think not all of us are going to benefit. The students are going to benefit from really being confident that what they're doing is industry relevant. The providers are kept honest about what it is that they're doing and are actually then forming those relationships with industry that makes the experience real and meaningful. So, and I think the industry then will also gain a whole lot from ensuring that the skill shortages that they are meeting on a day-to-day basis are being attended to by the educational providers. So I think it's not a matter of how they all work together, it's absolutely imperative that they work together.
So tonight's seminar is a combined effort between the newly formed IITP, Institute of IT Professionals.
Newly renamed, and been around for 52 years. So,
and of course getting IT right. Getting IT right is as it sounds. Let's improve New Zealand and let's improve IT in New Zealand, right? Getting IT right is a reasonably large initiative now. It's been running for a couple of years. We've got a lot of people sitting in behind us. A lot of IT people, a lot of support from the professional bodies, like yourselves. The Accounting Society is also involved, IIBA, PMI, etc., etc. We've also got a reasonably good, if I like to call it board, but we generally call them ambassadors, of CIOs around town, and they're supporting us too. So there's a lot going on there. We've done a nationwide survey with the IDC, and all those results are now out, and they're sitting in as probably a benchmark to say, right, this is where we're at today, and now let's go and try and improve things. And this is probably one of the examples of how we're trying to do that, is to work together to promote particular ideas and models to really improve New Zealand. And so this is how we fit together, is that we're very, very supportive of the ITCP, the certification, because accreditation is vital. It sets a standard, it sets the level that we all work at. And look, the best analogy is back to accountants, engineers, doctors. They all have it. If they stuff up, boy, do they get in trouble, right? Do we? We don't really have that accountability. And I think this is what this brings, is accountability to our industry. Now, that might sound a bit negative, but the absolute positive of it is that when we get asked to do something that's not appropriate, we can now say no and say, hey, hang on, we've got a professional standard to live to, and we're professionals, and this is what we do. So I think it's just absolutely fantastic, and I think the work that the whole of the IITP, Paul, Ben, Ray, everyone's just outstanding. So I'm just so very proud to know these guys. So that's that. Now, say my little speech about you.
There's a speech about me as well. I thought that was it.
Sorry, I'm taking over. So just to introduce Ray. Ray is the president of the IITP. He's been working as an IT professional for a number of years. His career spans blue chip corporates, the public sector and the SME sector as well. He has experience from both vendor and buyer perspective, which I think is very, very important. And it said he's the number 32 on the list of the IT certified professionals, which is quite a good thing. So over to you, Ray.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this exposition on what it means to be an IT certified professional, which I have to say has some risk of being a little bit of a dry subject. So I thought that I would turn the topic on its head and talk first of all about why it matters, and I hope that will be at least as interesting as the material that follows, which will be what it is. So before I get into that, though, I'd like to get a bit of a sense of who's in the room. So if you're involved in software development, put your hand up. Are you a software developer? Got a few of those. Okay, fantastic. What about are you a CIO or an IT manager? You've got a governance responsibility. Okay, we've got a couple of those. Fantastic. What about project managers? Ben's putting his hand up. Right, we've got a few of those. Fantastic. What about business analysts? Right. Okay. This is working well so far. What about infrastructure engineering type people? A few of those as well. You can't put your hand up every time, Ben.
Sorry.
So, are there any people that would consider themselves none of the above? Right. So illustrates a couple of things. First of all, there's the point that IT is a very broad church. When we talk about IT, we're talking about lots of different things. And all of those things don't necessarily relate strongly to one another. The other thing that's important is that I could make a series of assumptions about who's in the room, and I might be entirely incorrect. And that is also a factor that we practicing in IT are constantly having to deal with, the unknown. So, here's the obligatory YouTube clip.
Thanks, guys. What a pleasant surprise. This one's full of surprises, you guys.
Tricked. This is a surprise.
Silence. We heard Sparta was on the warpath. We were eager to join forces.
If it is blood you seek,
You're welcome to join us. I should bring only this handful of soldiers against Xerxes. You see, I was wrong to expect Sparta's commitment to at least match our own.
doesn't it? You, what's your profession?
I'm a butler. And you, Arcadian, what is your profession?
Sculptor, sir.
You?
Blacksmith.
Spartans! What is your profession?
See, old friend, I brought more soldiers than you did.
Now, I've never actually seen that movie, believe it or not, but I really like that scene. And although you always get the unexpected responses, one of my guys, when I showed him that, said, well, I'm not entirely sure what a professional hua is anyway. But I think it does illustrate the difference between a true professional and an amateur. Now, I don't mean to imply that an amateur is a negative term, and it's also often used that way, but I don't necessarily take that context. And the reason for that is because the word amateur comes from French, and it simply means somebody who loves it. It's somebody who loves whatever it is so much that they're prepared to do it for free. And that is absolutely fantastic. Amateurs play a hugely important role in society in all sorts of endeavours, and they are a very valuable part of, for example, the not-for-profit community, including, I might add, IITP. But that is not the same thing as being a professional. So I'd like to ask you just one more time to put up your hands. Who here considers themselves to be a professional? Is there anybody here who considers themselves to be an amateur? Good on you. Good call. Okay, brave statement. Thank you. So I'm going to give you a few more examples. I am a keen photographer, but I'm an amateur photographer. And this is a photograph that I took. It's a photograph of Lake Howea down in the South Island, near Wanaka, and it's, I think, quite a good photograph. And a lot of professional photographers that I know agree with that. The issue here is that it is amateur work, and the characteristic of amateur work largely is that you get lucky every now and again, and you get a great picture. A professional photographer, I happened to stop on the side of the road driving between Wanaka and the west coast, which runs past Lake Howea, and I just saw this sign. I stopped the car, jumped out of the car, took the picture, and got the picture. And you might not think it's a great picture, by the way, but that's entirely your opinion. But the key thing is there was an accident. A professional photographer would spend a day going out there to get exactly that image, and they would think exactly that image was what they were going to get before they started. That's the key difference between an amateur and a professional. And you might not think that that's important, but let me show you another clip to illustrate my point. Anyone seen that clip before? Anyone heard of Dan Osmond? That is fair dinkum stuff. There is no trick photography. Obviously it is staged for the camera, but that is genuinely what he used to do. I might add that he's dead now. And he did get killed doing extreme things, not that particular one. But that is absolutely what he used to do, basically run up the side of a vertical wall like Spider-Man. Now, anybody who wanted to do that on an amateur basis would be dead a lot quicker than Dan Osmond was, I would suggest. That's not something that you would ever start unless you had a very clear understanding of whether or not you could actually finish it. Because you don't have to get very far off the ground before you start to get into stride. So let's talk about IT then. Now, getting IT right. Are we getting IT right? Well, these are the stats from the Standish Group. Who's heard of the Standish Group? A few people. I'm not surprised, because the Standish Group gets a lot of press for their stats, which they publish regularly about how well or otherwise IT projects go. And you can see that that this sort of thing creates a lot of disquiet. In fact, it's been quoted a number of times in Getting IT Right. The issue is that this doesn't just create disquiet in the IT industry, it creates disquiet in the C-level and the CEOs that pay for all of this stuff, and the shareholders and so on. But I think we have to dig a little bit deeper than the surface. First of all, what does it mean? What do these things mean? Well, the standard definition of failed is straightforward enough. The project simply wasn't delivered. Well, okay, we'd all agree that that was a failed project. But to be a successful project, it has to meet three very important criteria. Who knows what the three legs of the project management are? Three pillars of project management: time, scope, and cost, right? So you have to get your project on time, within budget, and totally within scope to be deemed successful according to the standards group. Now that's actually quite a tough standard, and we could argue that that should be the standard we apply to, and I would make that argument. But to say that a project is challenged is not quite the same thing as it might appear to be. So then the rate of failure, yes, it is higher than it should be, but it's not quite as high in many cases as these stats would lead you to believe. You know, if you think about the basics of getting things right, if you want to drive home from, I live 15 minutes drive from work, and most evenings I would be prepared to say that my estimate for driving home is 15 minutes. But the reality is I wouldn't bet any money at all that I could do it in 15 minutes every time, and I actually wouldn't care if it took me 20 minutes or even 25 minutes. So that has to be taken into consideration when we're talking about success and failure. And it's also interesting to apply other standards. So if you're interested in time management, and I am, because there's still only 24 hours in a day, and that's never enough. The time management stats are quite interesting. If you're subscribed to the time management matrix, which talks about crisis management, about 25% of your time is going to be spent in crisis management in any job, if you're doing your job reasonably averagely. If you're doing it really, really well, you're still going to be spending about 20% of your time in crisis management, because that is the nature of work. That is the nature of the universe. Things don't always go exactly the way they should. Now, let's say that this standards group stats are absolutely fine and they're accurate, and but this is a worst case scenario. Could we improve project success by just 10%? And if we could, would that be a good thing to do? What do you think? Would it be a good thing to do? What would it be worth to us? Well, here's some other stats. We think that information technology spending worldwide about $3.6 trillion. So 10% of that, probably worth having, right? So there is money to be saved here, money to be gained from doing this stuff better. Who knows who this guy is? Alan Turing? Yes, well done. About 1937, Alan Turing wrote this paper, which is widely regarded as the kind of point at which we started to understand what a computer is. He called it a Turing machine, or has been called a Turing machine. He was nominated by Time magazine as one of the persons of the century. Albert Einstein was the winner, you might remember. But Turing was in the running. And the idea, the quote there from Time is that the Turing was the guy who kind of started it all. And not everybody agrees with that, by the way. A lot of American computer scientists, for example, don't tend to necessarily subscribe to that. But he did define what we now know as a computer, really for the first time, about 75 years ago. So 75 years is actually not a long time in the scheme of things. If you think about the trajectory of the Industrial Revolution, 75 years between the first steam engines, and it was kind of the middle of the 19th century. So it's still not very sophisticated. Technology takes quite a while. But the idea of the universal machine that Turing came up with was a completely radical concept, because before computers, every machine was designed for a specific purpose. The computer is the first machine we've ever seen in the history of mankind that is multi-purpose by its very nature. And of course, it's software that does that. So software is the key construct that makes the key difference here. Who knows who this guy is? No? This guy's name is Fred Brooks. Who's heard the phrase "no silver bullet"? You must have heard it recently in town. It's been used, interestingly enough, in the context of the Kahui case just recently, which kind of spoiled my story, because I always kind of made the argument that Fred Brooks was the guy who brought the phrase "no silver bullet" into the lexicon, because he wrote a paper entitled just that. But in the early 1960s, IBM, not at that time the largest computer corporation in the world, they basically bet the farm on this computer system called the System 360, and I think there might be a few people in this room who remember those times. But it was a very big call. It was along the same sort of lines as Boeing did when they built the 747. If it had failed, the company would have basically gone out of business. But it didn't fail. It's widely regarded still as the most commercially successful computer ever, including all of the developments that came since. And it ensured IBM's dominance of the industry for the next 30 years. And Fred Brooks was the guy who managed the project, mostly the software operating system side of it. And he reported directly to Tom Watson, the chairman of the leader of IBM at the time. And in 1975, he wrote a book called The Mythical Man Month, which some people have heard of. Who's heard of The Mythical Man Month? There must be a few. I highly recommend it. And he later captured some of those key thoughts and reiterated them in his paper called No Silver Bullet. And one of the phrases that he came up with, along with many other very interesting and memorable phrases in that book, was the idea that adding manpower, and he did use the phrase manpower, so I apologize for the slightly sexist connotations there, but adding manpower to a late project simply makes it later. Now again, this was foreign territory for every C-level exec, because their idea of project was like picking cotton. If you wanted more cotton, you just got more people to go out there and pick, and you got more cotton. It was as simple as that. So this idea that that just doesn't work in software is quite new and quite foreign to a lot of people. And there is a big difference with software. And the difference is that software is pure thought stuff. We can conceive of doing anything in software. And I'm focusing on software because software permeates everything that we do in IT. Of course, not everybody's involved in software. But it is a unique construct. Brooks wrote that in comparison to every other creative medium, if you're a painter, you have to understand how paint flows across a canvas. You have to understand that it can smear. You have to understand that wood can split if you're a carpenter. You have to understand that you can break stone if you're a sculptor. These are physical media that mean that you have to have a whole bunch of other things other than the pure creative construct. Software didn't have any of those problems. Any developers, correct me if I'm wrong, developers in the room, you can conceive of anything and you go all night to make it come real. And you can do it because it comes completely out of your head. The problem with that is what? Anyone like to venture? Well, our thoughts are imperfect. We can't actually, as human beings, conceive perfect constructs creatively. So we come up with these things that we think, this will be fantastic, I can make this fantastic thing. And after, if we're lucky, after we've only spent, half the night on it, then we find out that it's not going to work. But more often, we don't find that out until much later. So creativity makes a difference. The nature of the mind makes a difference. And the thing is that why I've been focusing a little bit on the history is that this isn't new. We have known this for 37 years. So at least in the most generous interpretation, that is half the time that the industry has existed. So this is not new information. It's just not widely known information. And this is completely unrelated too, but I really liked the quote. I saw it on Facebook the other day and I thought it was very appropriate. There's this intense, I don't know if anybody, put up your hand if you've actually felt this when you're creating something in software or in IT, is that intense flow mode that you get into and you think, you just don't want to think about anything else until it's done or until you collapse. I still get that, which, is a problem because I'm crap at it now. But unfortunately, none of this makes any sense at all to the people with the money. You cannot try saying to any CEO that you know, adding manpower to this project that's late is simply going to make it later. Just try that and see how you go. I'm pretty confident that you're not going to get a very positive response because they just don't get it. It is completely foreign to their way of thinking. That's not because they're stupid or because they're ignorant. It's because they just don't think in that paradigm. It is something that is different and new. They tend to be hard-nosed, very results-oriented, very pragmatic people. And that's why we have Dilbert. Because Dilbert represents perfectly that dynamic between the two different ways of looking at it. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we don't see, or some people don't see, IT as a pathway to the boardroom. Because the perception of those guys who dominate the boardroom, and the few women that dominate the boardroom, is that IT guys don't get it. I was in a course today, and it was fascinating. It was fascinating to put it in the context of this presentation, because it was a course on IT governance. I've been involved in IT governance for 20 years. I thought I should go on a course and learn something about it. And there was 3 people from the same organisation. 2 of them were from the IT department. One was the IT manager, I think, and the other one was something to do with the IT department, not sure. And the other one was general manager of operations. And the dynamic, the IT guys are like this, and the managers are like that. Those are the words they used in the room, talking about these things. That dynamic is incredibly important, incredibly significant in this whole issue of whether or not we get these things right. This is the Airbus A380 Singapore Airlines. Now, I don't know if actually I've been on that particular plane, but I have actually been on the Singapore Airlines A380 in business class, and I can tell you it's very nice. Singapore Airlines went out of their way to make the best business class service in the world on the A380. And I walked up to my seat, and I looked at it, and I thought, oh, who's sitting next to me? Because it was big enough for 3. It is a very impressive piece of technology. But I think that some things that we can learn from other industries. And one is this concept that we talk about a lot of a service level. And what do you think a 99.99% service level? Who thinks 99.99 is a really good service level, by the way? Anybody brave enough for that? Okay, cool, fantastic. Because that's in IT, that's great, right? Was a telecom said, no, we're not going to do the 5th 9 anymore after the 2 lines went out. So what would a 99.9% service level in aviation represent, do you think?
How many crashes per annum?
It would be 4 crashes a day just at the major airports, at the top 30 airports. That's what a 99.99% service level would be in aviation. That would be 2 Airbus-sized events in New Zealand per week. And if you don't think that's sobering, if we were to apply a better, say twice as good service level to surgical operations in New Zealand, that would mean over 36,000 preventable deaths just in New Zealand in 2011, according to the Ministry of Health stats. Now the road toll is only 284, right? So, do you think we might have a bit of an issue with that if that were actually the case? I mean, we have a certain level of concern about our health system. Many people do. I'm sure that many people will know people that have had adverse events in surgery, because it actually isn't that uncommon. But what do you think the success rate actually is? Would anyone like to venture a guess? Come on, you're braver than that. This is my best guess. And it's based on the research done by Professor Peter Davis, who's Helen Clark's husband. And he did a study that in about the year 2000, 2001. And the estimate was that about 6% of people who go into hospitals for various things will have some kind of adverse event, and 16%, and about 6% of those will die from it. So that is actually quite a few, because there's a lot of operations. There's over 300,000 operations in a year. But it's still 99% success rate. So it's not great. And it is the reason, I would submit to you, it is the reason why people have got a level of concern about the health system. And by the way, New Zealand's health stats are at least as good as any other developed nation, and better than most. But nevertheless, we do have a concern about a 99% success rate in health. And it also turns out that a lot of research has been done over the years on what constitutes success and how success is actually achieved in IT systems. And this is a study, this is a model that was produced by a study done by 2 academics called Delany and McLean. They reviewed about 180 academic peer-reviewed journals, or academic peer-reviewed reports from about 7 journals in about 1992, and they came up with this construct that this is what constitutes IT success. So the key point is that in order to have a successful IT implementation, I'm not just talking about delivering the thing, I'm talking about making the benefits as a consequence of that delivery. You need to have good system quality. The system needs to be of good quality itself, needs to work well, be fast, responsive, all of those things. And therefore it needs to be able to produce good information of good quality so that users get what they want out of it. And what happens is that when those two things work, then there's an increase in the use of the system, and there's an increase in the user satisfaction in the use, and there's a kind of a virtuous cycle that goes on that encourages people to get more benefit and more use of the system over time. And that results in a better individual impact. So individual impacts sheet from the virtuous cycle, and the many individual impacts and positive impacts constitute an organizational impact, because guess what? Organizations are just collections of people. So you can't just say, well, the organization is going to benefit. That doesn't work. The people have got to benefit from the organization. That's what Delany and McLean considered constituted IS information system success. And I think Paul must correct me because he's doing an MBA. I think this is still widely taught in some MBA courses on information systems. It certainly proved to be very persistent up until certainly a few years ago. I'm not sure, because I've kind of lost a bit of interest in academia myself, having completed my own master's. I don't know how this has developed, but it has over the years been a very persistent model. Are there any information systems gurus in the room that would correct me on that? No, fantastic. So my thing stands. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, unfortunately, I'm sorry, we can't blame anybody else for it. The issue is that as information technology professionals, and just about everybody here considers themselves to be one, we are stuck with fixing this. We have to deal with these complexities and uncertainties because nobody else understands them the way we do. And if I would submit to you that if we don't, then decisions will be made by other people that are going to be things that we will not like. Another thing that Fred Brooks wrote in the article No Silver Bullet, he said that when we discovered that germs were the cause of disease, bacteria and viruses and so on, we had to let go of the idea that demons created it. And that was a problem because it was really easy to blame the demons. You know, oh, I got sick, it wasn't my fault. It's the demons that did it. God did it. External forces that I don't understand did it. We can't apply that to IT because, as I hope I demonstrated to you, there are no demons out there. But it isn't a simple answer either. To keep healthy, one of the things you have to do is exercise regularly, eat your vegetables, wash your hands. That all sounds pretty boring. I'd rather just blame the demons. And I see a lot of that in this discussion around success and failure of IT, where there's a very strong tendency, and I mentioned the room that I was in today, where there was a real tendency to say, well, if you guys could just decide what your strategy was, we could deliver the system. Fantastic. I don't believe that's the case. I think that's demons. And I think that people need to understand that there is a much more complex dynamic going on there. And both sides of the equation need to understand, by the way. But there's no way that we're going to get the CEOs to understand that by telling them they're doing it wrong. Because they're the ones that have been making the money for quite a while now. So it's a long, slow haul. And at the risk of offending everybody in the room for one final time, I would suggest to you, when we talk about 99.9% service levels as being really good, we're not setting the bar high enough for ourselves. We're making it too easy to succeed. So, should I carry on, or are you going to run me out of the room right now? How does that relate to ITCP, this idea of information technology certified professional? Well, first of all, what do we mean by a professional? This is the definition that comes out of the paper, which you can download for yourself from the ITCP.org site. This is has got a little bit of multiple repetitive use of the same word, but an individual working at a senior level, so somebody who knows what they're doing within the ICT domain, so we're talking about IT, who has a basis of ethics and professionalism and has specialized knowledge and the influence and capability to use this knowledge. That's the definition that we've set for professional. And it turns out that there are plenty of professions in the world, and that those professions have been, as tends to happen, they have been categorized and analyzed, and these are the 5 levels that are considered to make up a profession. So the first level, it's simply a bunch of people. There's a recognized community. At the second level, there's a whole qualification regime that is designed. Then it becomes more tightly governed by a framework of professional bodies. Then it becomes something that has very significant public interest. And there's a whole taxonomy of tests that you have to pass, that the profession has to pass to be considered those public obligations satisfied. And then, only then, can you talk about having a statutory regime that oversees all of that. So who can think of a profession to which all of those things apply? So a level 5 profession. Medicine. Yep, that's one. What's another one? Sorry? Electricians? Okay. Yeah, so there's a law and so on. Yeah, okay. Teachers. Yes. So what about IT? Does it apply to us? Where would you place us on that scale? 4? As high as 4? 1? Any advance on 1? This is what the characteristics of a level 1 profession are. So, again, I've been passionate and completely obsessed and involved in IT for 32 years. But I'm not self-delusional enough to think that we don't have, that we have a very highly sophisticated profession. We are, in our opinion, and my opinion also, we are at level 1. So all of the issues and problems, if you see them that way, as listed here, do actually apply to the IT industry at the moment. So introducing ITCP will help us to move to level 2. It won't get us there by itself. There's a few other things that have to happen as well, as you can see there, because these are the characteristics of level 2. But it is a very important step along the way. And bearing in mind, going back earlier on, there is that need to understand that this is a long, slow climb. There is no way that anyone's going to pass a law next week that says you're all fantastic guys and that you're all certified. That's just not going to be the way it's going to work. So there's a thing called a skills framework for the information age, which is again the taxonomy of skills, and this is just a shot of it. It goes way down below. If I shrunk it to fit on the screen, you wouldn't be able to read any of it. But what it does is it indexes and classifies all of the different skills that all the people in this room hold, and that I hold, and all the people who work in the IT industry hold. So it's a framework, it's a taxonomy, and this is the basis for the ITCP. That's another photograph that I took. It's a photograph of Mount Aspiring, so I thought I'd show that one to you. Amateur photographer. So if you are in fact aspiring to ITCP, there's some things that you have to do, and I'm sorry about that because it isn't actually a simple and straightforward process. But if it was, then it wouldn't be worth anything. So it is rigorous, and there is a series of steps you have to go through. But most of these steps are quite easy. You don't actually have to work too hard to achieve them, but it's not overly easy. So these are the 10 things that you have to do essentially online for most of them to start the process. And I'm going to talk about some of them, not all of them. And the reason for that is because I don't understand some of them. So Paul can fill me in if I go off track here, because he's been living this stuff at a much more intense level than me. Paul Matthews is our CEO of the Computer Society, by the way, for anybody who hasn't met him. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to decide how you want to apply. So there's various different ways that you can enter into the scheme. So one is the first one is the formal education and experience. The next one is you are an established IT professional. You can also be an established academic. There's also cross-recognition from other, because this is not the only country in the world that has got an IT certification. There is the, what used to be the British Computer Society is now the, help me out here, Paul. Chartered Institute for IT, BCP, the Chartered Institute for ICT, and they have chartered IT professional because they have a Royal Charter. And there is also one in Australia, and there is an organisation called IFIP, a worldwide organisation that recognises these qualifications if they meet these certifications if they meet a certain standard. So there's a cross-recognition, there's exams, and there's the very few number of people who can be deemed to be an industry leader of some weight. There's a series of basic entry requirements, so you have to be of good and sound character. It's a nice medieval sounding phrase. You sadly need to be a member of IITP, but that is a process in its own right. And that's more than just being an affiliate member. You have to be a full member grade, so that's essentially the professional grade. But you can apply for that contemporaneously at the same time. You need to have two people of good standing themselves who are prepared to act as your referees. And basically what they need to say is, yep, I'm prepared to vouch for this person, that they actually are operating at the level that they say they're operating in your framework, and you can't be a criminal. Completely unreasonable, I know, but there you go. And there are 7 levels to the Sophia framework. So the ITCP called a certification requires you to be practicing at level 5. And level 5 is characterized by a professional fully accountable and responsible for the outcomes of their work. And by the way, you don't have to remember all of this stuff because you can go to itcp.org.nz and you find all of this stuff explained in considerably more detail than I can give you tonight. You have to provide some supporting material. So we don't just take your word for it. We actually have to give a bit of an essay that talks about it. It has to be written by you. And it must demonstrate those things. So you actually have to be able to say, it's a bit like a resume, I guess. You have to be able to say, these are the things that I've been doing. Who doesn't have a resume all lined up and polished and ready to go when that big job offer? You don't? Well, you should, Tanya. Send it to me. And the referees have got to have certain characteristics. So they have to be practicing professionals at a certain level. They preferably somebody that knows you in the reporting context. So it's not too different from any other kind of reference that you might expect to require for a job description, for any job that you might apply for. These referees don't need to be IITP members, which I think they should be. I mean, that would just be great from our perspective, but they don't have to. There's a whole bunch of information around the professional knowledge, which is probably not something that I want to go into in too much detail here. Go to the site and read about it, but there's basically, you need to have a wider perspective than just I'm really good at coding or I'm really good at whatever it is that you do. So you have to have some understanding of ethics, managing risk, a legal compliance framework, organizational roles, and so on. And that's all, again, specified on the site. And then when you get the thing, of course, it's like anything in IT, you know, it's all that once we've got it up and running, then we have to maintain it and fuel it and keep it going. So there are ongoing requirements, not too onerous, but you do need to conduct yourself professionally, and there is a sanction within the scheme if you don't. There is a requirement for continuing professional development, as there is with any profession, and that can involve things like working on a volunteer basis for IITP, for example, or many other things that you might find more interesting. Accreditation of other people, payment of fees is always an important thing to keep the wheels of commerce turning. And there's a re-accreditation process every few years, so it lapses, it's perishable after a while. So those are kind of the key organizational requirements. And then, when you've done all of that, because all of that's so easy, then there's an assessment process. There's a kind of like an interview that's usually done by a teleconference, and then there's a final assessment, and then you get your certificate and your right to use IT Certified Professional on your business card or anything else that you like to do, assuming that you maintain it. So that really brings me to the end. Apart from to say, my view is that regulation of the IT industry is coming, if not imminent. It's been talked about actually quite. The problem with going around saying that things aren't working that well is that serious people take notice of you every now and again, and they think, well, we should do something about that. Maybe we could, regulate, because those are the tools that regulators like to use. That's been talked about in the chambers of power, but it hasn't happened yet. But I think it's inevitable that it will happen. My view is that anybody else who doesn't get those things that I've been talking about tonight, regulating our industry is not going to be a good outcome. Right? I would prefer that the industry is self-regulated to the point when that question comes up and says, what are you guys doing to regulate yourself? Because it turns out you're in charge of some fairly important stuff, and they seem to be spending a lot of money on it and doesn't seem to be going that well. What are you doing to regulate yourselves? So we've got an answer for that, and ITCP is part of that answer. But it's only a first step. But I will say that I don't believe that people who actually would meet the criteria for being ITCP would find the process either arduous or expensive. It is thorough enough to have meaning, but it is not, it's as simple as it can possibly be. And yes, it costs money. I'm sorry about that. Lots of things in life cost money. I like coffee. I'm a coffee fanatic. I've just recently reduced my intake from about 12 a day to 2 because that's way better for my health. But it costs me $3 every time, and I'm sorry about that. That's just what a coffee costs. And an ITCP costs you less than a coffee a day. So I don't think it's too expensive, beyond the reach of everybody. So that is my presentation for this evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm happy to take some questions or not. We could go and have a drink. But are there any questions, comments?
I guess the thing that maybe puts me off is that it doesn't seem to be asked for or recognised by people looking to hire. So if I'm a contractor, happily getting contracts, and nobody's saying, oh, I do ITCP, or there's no driver to get it. And maybe at some point that changes, but for now.
So all I can say to you is you'd better hope that continues. A few years ago, I went and spent a truckload of money at the University of Auckland, and I got myself a master's degree, and it has never been asked for on any resume or any job description that I've ever applied for either. But I kind of felt it was the right thing to do for my future security.
Could I possibly jump in on that too? Because I totally agree with what you're saying. But I think that a lot of the things you've said are going to come together, like the regulation. And possibly, I was having a conversation with someone, was it you, Paul, that when you go and pitch for your next contract and you are certified, and as the whole thing comes together, you're going to be the guy that gets the job.
And he's a recruiter.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. I do, put my hand up and say that's my view as a recruiter.
It is a fair call. The issue is that the same could be applied to any qualification. So that doesn't mean that qualifications aren't useful things to have. That just means that they are what they are. The thing that I think we have to be conscious of is that if you look at what's happened, the world's gone through a massive economic crisis that is kind of still going on, but nobody that I know in IT has suffered a jot. Why is that? It's because we are, and we have been for the last 20 years actually, in very strong demand. Now that's a situation that ultimately the market will take care of. So sometime in the future, contracts and jobs and everything else will simply not be as easy to come by as they used to be. And I don't know if that's next year or next 20 years. Maybe my career will be over before that's a problem, but I wouldn't want to bet on it.
There's another unrelated one. Kind of related actually. I'm just wondering, it kind of seems like, for me at the moment I'm studying, and it's kind of an all or nothing certification.
Yeah.
Is there any plan to have any kind of intermediate qualification?
Yes, there is. Yes. Yes, we have what we're calling certified technologist. So it's the same principle, but it's lower down on the scale, so that you can get it without some of the characteristics we've been talking about today. That is coming. We'll probably have that in certainly the next 12 months.
And it kind of still shows that, eventually you want to get to that level.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's right. So what we would like to see as a profession. I mean, if you look at accounting, for example, what happens? I mean, my nephew's just graduated and top of his class from Victoria and came up to Auckland to work for KPMG, and he spent the first 6 months of his career kind of re-adding the numbers in all of the spreadsheets just to make sure they all added up, because that's what happens when you start off in that career. And they have very clearly defined scale, and of course right at the other end of it is partner with great wealth and fame and success. If you want to be a chartered accountant, it's very clearly mapped out. So that we think that something similar in the sense that things being clearly mapped out, not people doing boring work when they start. But a career trajectory needs to be developed.
Just based on what you said, I think having the certification amongst other people, when you send through resumes, is just going to begin to show and make a point of difference for you, not of the rest of the people. And I think that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, over time that's certainly the case. I mean, if you get ITCP tomorrow, who knows what difference it would make, I don't know. But I do know that small differences do make a big difference in the scheme of things when people are weighing those things up. And I know that Scott's going to be insisting that all of the people that come in giving him resumes have got it from now on.
So just on what's been done behind the scenes to promote the qualification to the consumers?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And there is a whole program of work. We're working with with government and with education and with the community at large to promote it. It's a bit of an interesting dance that we have to go through, because we don't want to be seen to be pushing it inappropriately. We don't want to be kind of thinking that people have got to do this because we say so. We want it to be taken up at the rate that is appropriate for the balance of all of those things. But there's no doubt that what you say is correct. When people start asking for it in job applications, then people will want to do it. So what we want to do is we want to have that in place, ready to go, and reasonably well developed when that time comes. And we are working in various ways in the background to try and make that happen. But it is very much a multi-factorial strategy, of which getting this message out is a part.
And that extends through to secondary schools as well.
That's right.
The ITCP program.
Yeah.
So I think that possibly, coming back to your original question, the other thing that's going to happen is secondary school and tertiary graduates are going to come through with a qualification, and they're slowly going to grow like this, and they'll be if you like, your threat, because they will. Now, and the other thing I'd support here is that there is a lot of work going on in the background, and possibly in my role as getting IT right, not recruitment, there is people in this room from Auckland Auckland University and from MIT, and I know others from the other tertiary educators who are very keen to hear about this, about what the industry wants and about certification, and possibly to the global sort of accreditation, so you can then take your certification and go to other places. So there definitely is stuff happening in the background.
Yes, that's an important point. It has global reach as well.
Yeah, I can vouch for that as well. I'm in the second week at AUT, and the first, presentation that we got from the head of school was talking about ITCP, so it's definitely getting pushed at our level.
Oh, that's good to hear.
So how many are currently certified?
At least 32.
Yeah.
I haven't got the exact numbers, but it's in the hundreds rather than the thousands still, but they're coming through quite...
The high hundreds or low?
Probably about the mid-hundreds for around there, but it varies as well, because you've got people that have done it, and then you've got about 300 or 400 that are working through the process, but it's hard to define whether they have stalled, looking to come back to it later, or whether they're not continuing. So.
And how much of the market penetration do you think that is?
Oh, it's quite low, and we're certain. I mean, it's everyone over here said it's a chicken and egg situation. If everybody has ITCP, and everyone is demanding ITCP, then everyone will go out and get ITCP. What we've got to do is gradually create both the supply and the demand side for it. I think in terms of what Ray's talked about today, there's very much a need for it, and there'll certainly be thrust upon us if we don't, as an industry and as a sector, come up with our own solution, which we believe ITCP is. And it's really just a case of working through those steps, getting government on board, who are very supportive of this. We had Amy Adams this morning at breakfast doing a presentation to the Institute in Wellington last week. At the official level as well, recruiters in terms of understanding what the certification or accreditation means, and really just move the whole thing forward at a pace where it's balanced and you're trying to solve that chicken egg situation. So yeah, the market penetration is quite low. There's certainly an early adopter advantage going in there. There is the issue of the other side as to who recognises it. But when two people put forward an application and they're both looking quite similar, and one has been independently accredited by the professional body of your industry and the other one doesn't, who are you going to give the job to?
Vocabulary and change that is really difficult to understand. And so actually it's answering that question, what do I look for that will help me determine who's the best candidate? Well, accreditation would be one of those, maybe a lazy device, but actually it's a very valuable device for someone who really can't interpret the sophisticated language that's often required. So often the people making the decisions are not often the best qualified to make a determination of who is genuinely the best candidate. So this would be valuable in that regard.
I might ask, what's the which level is this certification aimed at, and what is the curriculum or the skills base that it's meant to be bringing to the table in the business environment? I saw the chart about operating the level, is it advised? Or I'm not quite clear what that's referring to, and understanding sort of where in the hierarchy definition of senior is.
Right, so I think possibly an analogy might help. So if you think of I can't remember how it's named now, but the engineer who is the one that's able to sign off on the building design. That's the kind of equivalent analogy that we've got. So it's that level of seniority, that ability to say that not only can I do this work or see that the quality of this work is at a high standard, but I'm prepared to vouch for that, and because I've been able to drill into the details. So I'm not sure if that's quite answering your question, but it's the analogy that works for me. In terms of the specifics, please do have a look at the Sophia stuff, because it is quite detailed and probably not something that I can regurgitate at this hour on a Thursday night. But
I understand. I'm just thinking, because I know from memory you were talking about business acumen, risk management. Is that project risk management or commercial risk management?
I mean, it could be a range of those things. It would depend on the context, because obviously the skills framework covers a whole range of different things. So if it was project management, it probably would be project risk. If it was innovation or any of the business related things, more likely to be commercial risk.
So in this regard, is the Institute able to help us find our way through that framework?
Yeah, there is. The online process is pretty good, actually. Even though I was kind of concerned that the way the material is presented tonight can seem like it's this kind of overwhelming thing, but once it's kind of like any good online application, once it's kind of narrowed down to the actual steps, it's reasonably easy to navigate your way through.
And you can drop an email as well and talk you through any particular issues you've got along the way.
Well, if someone like me who's got like engineering and computer science, PMI certified, Sigma certified, so does it make anything easier for getting the certification done, or it's the same process?
Would depend. That would probably depend on the route you take, I guess.
Yeah. All of those things can count towards the entry requirements in terms of the grade. The process in terms of defining the particular skills that apply to you, that's the same for everybody. But having said that, the things that you're talking about would certainly lead you in a particular direction as you went through that. So it does count in terms of entry requirements into the program, but mapping out your own skills, doing the self-assessment of those, and then the interview process and the assessment process is based on the severe framework. But those things would be considered normal as well.
Okay. One last question.
CPD, how many hours per annum is that likely to be as a quantifiable by an annual amount? So
I can't remember.
It's actually interesting. We've just really very recently moved to a points-based system, but it's effectively 30 hours, but different types of activities will count for different levels. So I don't know if you're on a mailing list, remember there was some huge notifications coming out on that, so that line exactly how that works. But more or less it's 30 hours. Sounds like a lot, but when you break down what's actually included in that.
Yeah, so most people who are keeping in touch with their profession in a normal way would not struggle to reach that. Conferences, courses, those kinds of things.
Can I ask a question?
I don't know.
So you have ITCP, how does that connect then to the specialised qualifications? So if I was a chartered accountant, I could be an auditor. If I'm ITCP, how do I then connect to become a Prince 2 project manager, or how does that sort of work?
You want to take that one?
Phase 1 of ITCP has specific skills within the severe framework that are tied to it. So if you look at the register of those that have ITCP, you see the 2 particular skills that they've undertaken or have been assessed against. Phase 2, when it comes in this, is certainly the way the international community is going as well, is to then break it down and make it a lot clearer about the specialties within IT. One of the problems we have is defining what those specialties are, and it's an issue. We're not as broad as we're that much broader than other professions. We kind of think we are, but it's because we haven't defined those things particularly well yet. But as we go forward, when you actually look at it, you find there is a common body of knowledge, and there are specialties. It's just a case of defining what those are and how we can map that against those.
Actually, Scott, I'd like to make a comment about that. I mean, you said how would it match being for instance, a Prince 2 person. Remember, Prince 2 is a methodology, and you basically work through the course and you sit a test at the end. It's not a credential. It's not a professional credential.
That's a very good point, and so it probably doesn't map in exactly that way. I mean, it wouldn't obviate the need for you to do other certifications in various technologies as well. For example, the same thing. They're different. Yeah.
It's different. Prince 2 is quite different to the Project Management Institute, and it's 7 odd credentials that it has. So when somebody says that they're PMI credentialed, I then say, which credential do you have?
Yeah.
Is it PMP? Is it PGMP? What is it?
There are some that will apply in due course, some of the ISAPA qualifications where there's a level of practice, there will be possibilities of mapping, but we just haven't got there yet, we haven't had enough time.
And it will take time.
It will take a lot of time.
Possibly take 5 to 10 years before you get it well recognised in the industry. It does.
It does take a long time. Yeah.
And all of those organisations that you talked about, whether it's Project Management Institute or ITCP, they're all involved in the severe framework as well. So they're all working on the same issue from a slightly different perspective and to a slightly different outcome, but to define what those buckets are and how they interact with each other.
Okay, any further questions? Some good dialogue there. Thank you for that. And thank you, Scott, for working with us on this. And I guess we'll draw this part of the evening to a close. And I think there's a bit of mixing and mingling still planned for that. And thank you very much for your attention.
For ITCP.
I think the first thing is we've got to take a step back and really look at the type of profession that we want or the type of industry we want. And what really keeps me up awake at night and bothers me quite significantly is the fact that we're the only vocation or profession or anything that doesn't have independent standards in place. The person who comes and builds your house has got an independent accreditation in place. The electrician that comes and does it, the plumber who comes and does your pipes has got an independent accreditation in place. Yet IT professionals are there to look after this vast range and array of things that keep businesses and keep societies and keep economies going, yet there's no independent standards in place for them. So I think certification is absolutely essential to put the standards in place so that people can rely on our profession to do a good job and up to a minimum standard.
We think that anything that improves the level of knowledge and the level of ethical behaviour and the level of simply pure ability to deliver for businesses is a good thing. And the IITP has been working for a long time to encourage professionals to embrace the certifications and the educational opportunities that are available to them to that end.
And I think we have to identify the reason as to why this is required. That we have to grow, we have to improve, because as you've seen on the Getting IT Right initiative, that there was a huge problem in IT. And one of the key things here is to raise the standard to improve IT.
I think that we as an industry have to take responsibility for putting independent accreditation and standards and self-regulation in place. But what we do affects businesses to such an extent that it has to be a joint approach. So the industry and companies and corporations and things have to embrace what we're trying to do in terms of accrediting IT professionals, because it's them at the end of the day who are met with the consequences of that, have to pay the bills and have to bear the costs of it when we get it wrong. So I think it's got to be a joint approach by both the IT industry and industry as a whole.
Well, IT is a part of the business community, of course. It's the second largest exporter now, depending on how you count the numbers, after primary production. So we are a part of the business community. But I think there's often a feeling that we're a slightly different part of the business community and not quite as connected in some ways as we might be. So I think what we can do is we can understand that there are different ways of looking at the world and move away from our own world into that world. But I also think that there is some responsibility on the part of business owners and senior executives to move a little bit into the IT world so they can understand and communicate better. And one of the mechanisms for that is the professional development. So we provide forums where that can occur. And we often find people coming together in those forums that would not necessarily normally mix in the business community in quite the same way. So those are some of the things that may happen.